各位朋友，大家早安。好。我自己在这栋楼上课，有一个非常清楚的指标，受欢迎的课，那个学生进来都先坐第一排。如果不受欢迎的课，学生就尽量在后面坐，然后很不得已才最后，迟到了就会被塞到第一排。今天我们是刚好颠倒，一进来前面就很快就被占满，所以我们非常开心。今天有这样的机会跟大家在这边一起来研究以场域为主，怎么样设计课程的这个主题。一开始呢，我要先感谢义宇基金会那个执行长，策略长，还有几位基金会的朋友在这里这一次能够办成这个工作坊，主要是他们的支持。但是这里面各位也知道，这一次大家都缴费了，对不对？这么大办活动向来不收费，但是实在是一个好的品质的国际工作坊，它的成本很高。各位可以戴上耳机听非常高品质、专业的同步翻译。各位在未来3天呢，你可以随时讲北京话，对其他语言他们可能没有办法即时翻译，也许可以试试看，非常高品质的，所以你不用担心。所以需要各位一起来共同来协力这件事情，所以大家缴的费用大概支持了这整个活动的1/3。那其他还是要感谢义宇的支持。那为什么我们要做这件事情？是希望大家共同来面对台湾，甚至于亚洲整个性教育的需要。在台湾，我看到的至少2个需要。台湾我们在推行实验教育，包括蒙特梭利在内的创新型的教育，已经超过30年。特别是在幼儿园的阶段，蒙特梭利一直是一个相当某一种程度来说是主流的教育，动不动就说这是挂着蒙特梭利的幼儿园。可是再往小学上面去，学校就越来越少。到了中学，是这1-2年才陆续听说因为有机构可以办学的关系，慢慢的大家在尝试，可是还不稳。那以我这些年观察实验教育的一个很重要的原因是，如果你没有好的中学课程，幼儿园还没问题的，小学很多人就开始犹豫，特别念到4年级，有的家长就觉得孩子快乐4年够了再见，我要回到体系，面对未来升学考试。所以一个好的蒙特梭利中学对台湾的未来蒙特梭利的教育发展来说是非常非常重要的。这是第一个台湾的需求，我们在座关心蒙特梭利的人必须要共同面对。那么第2个需求是台湾的108课纲，我们的课程基本上10年一改。那108课纲接下来要求中学的教育将会大量降低，特别是高中的部分，降低它的必修课程，提高选修课程。选修课程里面有非常重要的特色课程，也就是它如何跟在地结合这样的特色课程，让孩子不是只是在学习那些套装的知识，而是跟生活息息相关的知识。这2个需求都有一个共同的呼吁，就是我们需要有蒙特梭利经验的好的中学的课程安排方式进入台湾或者亚洲的地方，让我们更共同的来学习，让蒙特梭利往上发展成为可能，让我们的108课纲在未来发展的过程里面有更好的不同的方式来作为参考。所以去年我有荣幸到Hudson接受中学的蒙特梭利的培训的时候，我第一次听到Adolescents 他来介绍，他是那时候我们全班大概40几个人在座对，在座2个我的同学，他们可以做见证。Adolescents 在讲课的时候， 让下面的男女啊都觉得非常的崇拜，很动容。所以那时候心里我就第一个想说，台湾需要那个蒙特梭利中学的现场工作者来分享的话 ，Adam 一定是要找的。所以后来我们的课程里面也到了他们的学校去，去做实地的场域为主的课程的探索。那在那个地方呢，他带了我们一整天，一些大人在他的导引底下听故事，听的这样 ，Sandra 你们可以 repeat 啊，这讲故事真的非常非常的精彩。但蒙特梭利的教学方式一开始要引起孩子的兴趣，对不对？引起动机这一部分，他用非常精彩的故事，让我们觉得说，走吧，我们去做个研究。所以我那时候在听完他的带领的课程之后，我就拜托说，如果有机会，可不可以请你到台湾分享？那时候拿了他的名片，然后他可能觉得这个人是不是随便说说，不知道，但是他很诚恳的说，如果有机会的话，我愿意。那我们回来之后，很快的讨论这件事情，我跟他联络，那很荣幸的。答应。那 Adam 呢？他自己在高中阶段是一个自学生，他在人生的这个求学的道路上面走的也是跟在座现在很多做的教育的市场一样，走的不是一般体制内的学习方式。然后我记得他到了26岁，因为我昨天有荣幸接待他们。稍微看了一下台北本地啊，所以跟他们借机会非正式的访问了一下。他26岁之后才去念大学，那之前他是一个音乐家，他是一个很浪漫的音乐家。他是一个摇滚乐团的那个吉他手，对，不晓得有没有机会请他表演一下。然后后来他在大学教了几年书，那么过去5年呢，他一直在蒙特梭利的中学里面负责中学部分的课程。那我觉得他是一个非常非常难得，充满了情感的，也充满了智慧，还各种经验的一个好的老师。那这一次呢，我们很荣幸，问说能不能有另外一位来协助。因为知道很多人在实做的过程里面，也许需要更贴近的一个经验的陪伴，所以我请 Adam 看能不能邀。他说他的夫人 Kelly， 也是非常好的一个老师。我在美国培训到他们学校的时候也见过 Kelly。那我觉得如果他们夫妻能够来，是最好不过。但是因为他们来自一个小的学校，我一开始的时候并不敢请他们说是不是可以2位一起来，但是他们愿意可以一起来。那么 Kelly 一直是中学老师，他教过的课程很多，是一个很全面的老师。他本来在体制内教学，也是这几年到蒙特梭利中学教书，所以他们是一对配合非常好。昨天我陪他们下午陪他们到深坑，然后附近山区在政大走了一圈，我们先做了田野调查。他们2位对于台湾的所有的事情，有那种非常纯真的那个单纯的一种很童心的反应，就是所有的事情都让他们觉得充满了趣味。我觉得老师一定要有这种特质，就是什么东西都好像都非常好玩，你才能够激发你的学生他们学习的兴趣。所以我觉得非常开心。我的介绍也非常的长。我们现在热烈掌声欢迎 Adam。
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I first want to extend my extreme gratitude to to Theo for that wonderful introduction and for just helping to organize all of this to bring everyone here together. And I'm also very thankful to Y2, to the Montessori Program for Global Impact, for Joanna, for just everybody who was involved in bringing this together and for bringing Kelly and I here to Taiwan. We truly, truly thank you. The work that you are doing here in Taiwan, I can already tell, is truly incredible work, and it is to be commended. This work that you are doing in experimental education and really focusing on Montessori and her very wise approach to everything. And I want to also extend my thank you to all of you who made the decision to be here today and this weekend. Thank you for being here with me and with Kelly so that we could share together and be together to learn from one another. I'm not just here to speak at you. I'm also here to learn from you, and I want you to know that. Being an educator, being a teacher is big work. It's hard work. It requires all of the capacities of a person's mind, of a person's heart, of a person's spirit. It is very big work. And so it is important for educators like us and even parents who are trying to raise young people in this world to come together at times like this so that we can share and we can encourage one another and we can learn from one another and we can figure out how to do this better because we need to do it better. This whole world needs to do education better. It has to change. And it is people like you who are willing to be here on a weekend like this that can make that happen. So thank you for being here. And I'm so happy to be here in this beautiful city, Taipei in Taiwan, for our first time. This is our first time to Asia, actually, not to Europe, but it's our first time to Asia, and we're just absolutely enjoying it, and hope that we can come back to stay longer sometimes so we can see more. But we couldn't leave our own school for too long. We have co-workers back there who are doing a little bit of extra work right now where we're gone, and they want us back. And I don't know, our students might miss us. Before I go on, I actually want to, I'm going to go outside of my notes a little bit. I want to talk to you for a few minutes as just kind of an introduction about my experiences that Theo kind of highlighted a little bit, but about my experiences that brought me to this point, because it's, in my mind, it's a little bit of a miracle that I'm even standing here talking about adolescents, and particularly young adolescents. And I feel that my story that leads me here, it connects me to why Montessori education is so important and why I am so passionate about it and why I feel it is so important. It truly has changed me as a person. It's transformative, not only for young people, but it's transformative for adults. When I went to middle school in America, I went to a school, and it was a city school in the city, not in the greatest part of the city, and it was an absolutely horrible experience for us. Middle school isn't fun for most people because it is a difficult age, but middle school for me was a time of great fear. The school that I went to, there was a lot of violence at the school that I went to. So I walked around mostly during my middle school years being afraid. And I couldn't get over that fear to learn and to develop in the way that I was supposed to learn and develop through middle school. I could not get over that fear. It was almost traumatizing. I feared for my own safety in my school. So much so that by the time I reached high school, my parents pulled me out of school and homeschooled me for my high school years. It was during those years that started to work, had a job, still did some schooling, learned to become really fairly self-sufficient. In so many ways, my experience at that point in my adolescence was what Montessori was talking about an adolescent should go through, even though I had no idea that's what was happening. So much later. So when I was in middle school, my love of learning and my natural curiosity that I had in childhood for learning and for understanding the world better, middle school killed it. It died in middle school. It took high school and it took my experience in sort of self-directing my education and my learning that helped to rebuild that back up again. And from there, as you heard, I became interested in all kinds of things at that point. So yes, I played in a rock band for a while before going to college and toured the country and traveled quite a bit. I was an assistant manager at a Starbucks for so many years. And that's where I met Kelly. I dabbled, as I went into university, I dabbled in architecture and graphic design and interior design. Ended up in the history of art of all things because there was something about the art history classes that I took that just impassioned me. I fell in love with the fact that humans could just create beauty just for the sake of creating beauty. There was something about that just lit a fire inside of me. And I said, this is it. I want to study this, I want to understand it, and I want to teach it to the world. And so I started to, I pursued advanced degrees and became a lecturer at the university nearby. After that, one of the professors that I worked with, his children went to a Montessori school. I still at this time did not really know what Montessori was. I had heard about it, seen it around, but I didn't know. He approached me, and his kids' school was in need of a humanities guide. And he just thought of me for some reason. It was in the middle of summer, school was not even in session. He emailed and asked if I had ever thought about teaching middle school. And I said, no. I said, no, I have never thought about teaching middle school. I have thought about avoiding middle school almost for the rest of my life. But never have I thought about going and actually teaching middle school. But there was a curiosity there. I had to explore it, so I went to this Montessori school, spoke with some people there, got a tour, met some students who had showed up just to tend to the gardens that they had, even though it was summer and they were off. And they truly impacted me. I had no idea that schools like that even existed. It was a utopia. It was like a heaven when it comes to schools. And the two young men that I met, the adolescents that were there gardening, I walked up to them as I was getting a tour. And they did not react in ways that I typically had experienced with other adolescents. They proudly came up to me, looked me directly in the eye. They shook my hand firmly. They introduced themselves. They were kind, they were professional, they were gracious. And so there is something happening here that is incredible. I think I have to be a part of this. So I just said yes. I just jumped in and said yes. And I stopped teaching at university and I went to this Montessori school. And there was something in that, just saying yes. And then teaching at this middle school and being transformed by the young people that were there and going to the Montessori training and being transformed by the experienced educators there. There was something about that that was healing to me. It was healing in a way because It was healing in the sense that I was able to regain what I had lost in adolescence through my experience. Somehow, I got that back again through Montessori and through working with adolescents. And it's been absolutely incredible. And one thing, as I started to learn about Montessori, I started to explore her teachings and her writings more. One thing that stood out to me, one thing that still stands out to me today, and one thing that I identify with when it comes to Montessori education, almost more than anything else, was the fact that Maria Montessori spoke of education so much differently than everybody else. She called it a mission. She referred to it as a mission quite often. That education is not just teaching, it is a mission. She said, and this is a quote, she said, "A great social mission that will ensure the child justice, harmony, and love remains to be accomplished. And this great task must be the work of education, for this is the only way to build a new world and to bring peace." I have another quote here on my screen. Another time she refers to education as a mission. "This is the mission of education. Let us therefore unite our efforts to construct an environment that will allow the child and the adolescent to live an independent, individual life in order to fulfill the goal that all of us are pursuing. The development of personality, the formation of a supernatural order, and the creation of a better society." Throughout all of my explorations through life and trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do with my life, I always felt an urge, and maybe you share this with me because you're educators, I always felt like I wanted to do something that was bigger than myself. I wanted to be a part of something that I felt would help the world become a better place during my time here. And when I read Montessori say these words, and others, I truly was drawn to them. She spoke these words in the 1930s. This was between World War I and World War II, when she had just witnessed the Great War, World War I, and all of its destruction. Most people at the time thought there could not possibly ever be another war like this. That was the war to end all wars. And yet in the 1930s, when Maria Montessori began really talking about education as a mission, it was already clear that there was another war on the horizon, another great war. With advanced warfare and weapons of mass destruction, this is when Dr. Montessori articulated her philosophy most clearly. This is when she said it in lucid and clear terms, bold and loud, for all the future to hear. That education is a mission. She said it is the true salvation of humanity and civilization. That it is necessary to build and perfect the armament of education. It was also at this time that she began to focus very heavily on adolescents for the first time. In a world where, in her view, technological progress had surpassed moral progress, she believed it was absolutely essential that we try to raise a younger generation that could be better than us, better than their parents, better than their teachers, more socially and morally aware, and that they would in turn raise another generation that would be even better than they. And that we would see generational progress until we could reach a world that was actually capable of coexisting peacefully. A world that could understand education as something that could enhance our interdependence on one another and the environment, rather than to destroy both. An education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking, she stated. It involves the spiritual development of man, the enhancement of his value as an individual, and the preparation of young people to understand the times in which we live. This is the mission of education. It is this mission that brings us together here today. The development of our children, the preparation of young people to understand the world in which they live, the preparation of an environment that would allow them to develop into moral, intelligent, empathetic, peaceful, and engaged members of human society. So with this in mind, we're going to be focusing this weekend on place-based learning. This is realized as an integral aspect of learning for all ages. It introduces the awareness of place into education and life as a means of reconnecting ourselves and our youth, our young people, to a relationship with the environment, with society, with communities, and with one another. Place-based learning, in my humble opinion, is a perfect complement to the experiential and developmentally based education philosophy created by Maria Montessori. It is a means to a greater end. It is one element in the greater framework of educating for a more peaceful world. So before digging into this topic for the weekend, we were invited to talk a little bit about our own school and our own program before really digging into place-based pedagogy. Because I understand that maybe there are some people here who are curious as to what an adolescent program can really look like in practice. And so that's actually where we're going to start here for the first time of today. Kelly and I are going to just talk about our school and talk about our program a little bit with you. So I'll go ahead and move on to that. I am from Hudson Montessori School. We are, I will show you where we're located actually, using some animation. Here's the National University. This is probably not at all where we actually are on the campus, but this is where we are currently located at the National University on the beautiful island of Taiwan. Our school in Hudson is all the way on the other side of the planet in the United States, and we are located in the state of Ohio, which is near the northeast section of our country. And in the northeast section of the state of Ohio, we have the town of Hudson. Hudson, Ohio has a population of about 25,000 people. It is a picturesque little town. Was founded in the year 1799 by a man named David Hudson, an explorer who came there and started a village. This is an overview of our campus, which Kelly is going to talk to you about a little bit here in a moment. But Hudson, Ohio was founded in 1799. Like I said, it was part of the Connecticut Western Reserve, Connecticut being one of the original states of the United States on the eastern seaboard. And there were sections of those states that went out west into the unexplored territory of the country at the time that states claimed. And so this little section of Ohio that we're from was once part of Connecticut. And explorers from Connecticut went out into what they called the wilderness. And they developed villages and towns. And we are one of those towns. So we have quite a rich history in our town. Tomorrow, I'll be talking a little bit about some place-based learning that we do right in our town, right in our village. And you'll get to see a little bit more of it and learn a little bit more. But Hudson basically is on, Hudson Montessori School is on about 12 partially wooded acres. That's 2 miles north of the city center. We have a lot of diverse land features, and we have a lot of room to grow as well, which we are working on a little bit of growth at the moment at our school. So Kelly will tell you a little bit about some of the features of our campus that we use for learning experiences.
Okay, so we have a nice I think our school is just a perfect size. We do want to see it expand, but we have a lovely wooded lot in the back of our main building, here being our main building. And the wooded lot is for upper elementary, lower elementary, children's house. We have a lot of natural features back there so the students can jump between stumps. We spent a lot of time fixing it to make it natural and beautiful. Our middle school students also go back there as well. One of our upper L teachers has just recently implemented a maple syrup project, and so we've tapped some of the trees back there and hope to have some maple syrup to be able to sell as well. There's a pond, which we do water studies with our students. And so that's just the back of the school. For us, the middle school, we are off to the side of the campus, which is so important for the adolescent. We know that they are not supposed to be, that stepping stone of being away from everybody else, because you're leaving childhood and heading off to the adult world. And so this is our campus here for the middle school. We have 2 buildings. They're old buildings, they're old converted homes, but they're beautiful. It doesn't look like an institution. It really feels very homey where we're at. I don't know, it's just a neat environment for sure. I taught at a high school, at a public high school for 12 years, so the whole notion of like the institution and rows of chairs, like I was used to that for a long time, so this is completely different for me. But we also have, we have a retention pond out front. We have a lot of like beautiful space here for multi-purpose activities that we can do. And this is our house. This is where Adam and I live. We actually rent from the school, and so there's an opportunity for growth here. There's also 2 family homes up here that are available too, so if the school decides to expand, we have that opportunity. So there's a lot of vision. So.
Just to give you a sense of the history of our school in general. Hudson Montessori School opened in 1962, and it opened as the 13th Montessori school in the United States. So we've been established for quite some time as a Montessori school. We began with 1 children's house classroom. We currently have, I think, 4 or 5 children's house classrooms in the main building. They've been expanding pretty quickly just in the past couple of years. So we've been adding more and more children's house classrooms. The adolescent program, the middle school, it started in the fall of 2005. And it started with a group of 11 students that came together to start the first middle school. 6 years later, in 2011, the middle school campus was expanded, and we added a couple of buildings. And our largest enrollment was 33 students. And that was the year that I came to the school, in the year 2014 and 15. Today we currently have, we're currently serving this good-looking group of 18 middle school students. Our enrollment kind of goes up and down every year. There are a lot of factors that influence what our numbers look like in terms of how many students we serve. But this year we have 18, and we are projected to begin growing again slowly up into the 20s starting next year, and thereafter just based on the admissions that we have in upper elementary. To serve these students, we are lucky enough to have quite a big staff that Kelly will tell you about.
So we have 4 full-time guides that work with the students. Beth Mast is our science and math guide. Amy Fagan is our microeconomy and also math. They split math between algebra and geometry. I am the humanities and language arts guide. Adam is our program coordinator or program director, but we tag team, being that we are married and never not talking about work. So we work together a lot in the humanities. What I think is beautiful about this is the collaboration that takes place. Right before we left, we finished a unit of study on immigration, which we'll come back to again when we return. But our science guy, Beth, is talking about cells and genetics right now. And so we've had a lot of opportunities this year for all that, for collaboration throughout the subject areas. And to me, again, coming from a different background, It's beautiful. I never knew that this could be a possibility. We also have part-time teachers too that kind of exactly they're shared with the whole school. Donnie Laurie teaches Spanish. James Rhodes is our ensemble teacher. He also started the Conservatory of Music at our school. And Pat Barker is our art teacher. So students have a little mixture of everything. I think, I don't want to say more important or most important, but we do bring a lot of specialists in because for the adolescent, it is very, very important for them to have opportunities to interact with other adults besides us. And so the specialists that come in, they're able to share their skills and their talents, and the students, you know, again, get another opportunity to interact with another adult that maybe they don't know very well, but they get to share that bond that, you know, maybe they don't have with us, or maybe it's a different bond, but in particular, we have a group from the Ohio Shakespeare Theater that we are very fortunate to be very good friends with, and they come in often and do a lot of drama and storytelling and things like that with the students, and so some of the images just show that too. And now we're going to talk about our spaces. And so our first space is North House, which is where the lads are predominantly sort of like our stationed area for sure. And so, as you can see, North House, it is an old farmhouse that has been converted into a school. This addition back here, we call it Commons. I'm not sure when it was added on, but it gives us a little bit more space to work with than just the farmhouse itself. But it is, it's very, very homey, and that's very important, like I said earlier, that it doesn't feel like an institution. It feels like a home. There's a connection there for our students. Up here in the top, this is our humanities library. We have a lot of books there for students to access. They sometimes want to fight us on that because they too love technology, but it is important for them to have the tools necessary to get the work done that they need to get done. And you can notice, there are no desks. It's wonderful. We want them to collaborate, we want them to work together, and so we set up the environment purposefully for that. They're always together. They need to figure out how to work together to get an assignment done or a project finished. So it's very open and welcoming that way. And this is our adorable kitchen. I'm sorry, I don't want to brag, but I really love this kitchen. It's just, you know, we're very formal in the fact that at lunchtime they put placemats out, you put out the right amount of plates that you need. The grace and courtesy is so important there. It is really wonderful. This is my third year in Montessori, and so I still feel like, I just can't believe it sometimes. But so yeah, so that's our space there. This summer, we spent a lot of time refurbishing the upstairs, and so we have offices on the second floor. This is our art room. It does not look like this right now. Since the school year started, it's gone through some changes for sure, but that's our art space. Just offices and other spaces for the students to be able to work, and our third floor library. As we grew, we also needed more space, and so again, we converted a family home, a ranch, to be the place where lessons for science and math happen. And so this is Garden Lane. We'll talk a little bit later about our gardens, but for now, the students do get to go back and forth. They have to transition between buildings, which is another lovely opportunity to teach them about walking and just things like that. As you first walk into Garden Lane, we have students' artwork of their choice framed and hung up, just again to give that, you know, this is professional work that you've done. We want to showcase it in that way, take pride in the work that you've done. Down here we have our great room, and this is where our lessons for science and math take place. And we also have a large kitchen. And for microeconomy, we do community lunch there, which means students are in charge of actually cooking lunch that we all eat and enjoy the next day. We're also hoping to convert this into a licensed commercial kitchen so that we can sell our food and have the right certification for it. We make jam right now, but we have to label it that it's, you know, jam made at home. It's not, you know, but once we get a licensed kitchen, that will help that for sure. We also, in the back of Garden Lane, have an indoor growing lab. So we have a hydroponics tower, which we are using right now for seedlings. Just recently, we had a microeconomy meeting where we're hoping to start planting some different kind of crops this year for production purposes, for what we wanted to do for next year. So we have this. We also have another spot here for growing our seedlings to kind of start things off. This is a humidity tent where we are working with mushrooms. Mr. Adam will talk a little bit more about that because he's the mushroom occupation man. So that's one of his roles. So we have a lot of great spaces. We're very fortunate. And with that, back to Adam.
So within those spaces, those two converted family homes on that small campus, we of course have a very detailed program that has become fairly well established over recent years. And it follows Dr. Montessori's plan of social organization in her educational syllabus. So before I get into the details of our actual curriculum, of our program that takes place on this campus, I do want to kind of break away and just provide an overview of what Montessori had in mind for adolescents, just so that everybody here is on the same page in terms of what an adolescent program is supposed to look like, particularly in an area like ours in Hudson. So first, I just want to provide an overview of the 4 planes of development, which is really at the foundation of Montessori education. I'm sure most of you know this. Her viewpoint of education is entirely based on human development, and that is one thing that also really made it stand out to me. That she saw education as a part of a whole, of something greater that happens within the developing human being. That the human enters the world as an infant and then develops really pretty rapidly into an adult, and that it is in that natural development that nature dictates that learning takes place, and nobody can really stop learning. It's just that in each stage of development, the growing human being is sensitive to different types of learning, and that is what she really tapped into. What you see right here, this graphic on the screen, is not from Maria Montessori. This is a representation of the traditional view of education that essentially says that as a child grows and gets older, which is represented by this ramp, that they can fit more and more and more information into their brains as they get older. That's the traditional view of education. So the traditional view says, let's figure out what information they should be putting into their brains at each age and just ramp it up as they get older. Maria Montessori said, no, this is completely inaccurate. And she came up with a different kind of graphic, and this graphic that you see is based on that graphic. But she came up with a graphic that shows just one single horizontal line that she called the line of life, going from birth to 24 years old, and divided into 4 separate planes or stages of human development, each lasting 6 years. So within this, she truly believed that education needed to serve each of these planes based on what these planes were sensitive to as the child grows, and that each of these planes has a different type of learning environment that that age group needs in order to learn optimally. So it turns out to be 3 to 6 is where children's house normally is in a Montessori school. From 6 to 12 is lower elementary and upper elementary. 12 to 15 in the 3rd plane is typically middle school. 15 to 18 would be upper school or high school. And then in the 4th plane you get into the university ages. That hasn't been explored quite so much. She used colors when she explained this to people, so the blue and red that you see are actually purposeful. They are meant to communicate something to the viewer. She believed that the planes of development in red that you see, the first plane from ages 0 to 6, and the third plane from ages 12 to 18 are more fiery, constructive stages of life. Whereas the blue ones are calmer phases of slower growth. So she used color to represent that idea. And it's actually, when you think about it, it's actually very true. If you compare a 6-year-old to a 12-year-old, a child at the beginning of the second plane of development with one at the end of the second plane of development, you will see that there is not really that drastic of a difference in terms of size, in terms of who they are. They're not that different. But if you compare a child who is a newborn infant with a 6-year-old, that is a lot of change that has occurred in those 6 years. They are an entirely different creature within 6 years' time, right? A lot of growth happens. The same thing happens through adolescence. When you look at a 12-year-old child and an 18-year-old young adult, two completely different creatures. So much psychological and physical growth happens so quickly during these two planes of development. So they really need an environment that is sensitive to that. So middle school, which we serve at Hudson Montessori, serves 12 to 15. I put the lightning bolt there to represent the fact that it is a very tumultuous time in human development, even more so than 15 to 18. This is such a rapid period of growth for all students, and it has some unique characteristics. Here are some just basic intellectual, moral, social characteristics of the adolescent. In your booklet, I'll point this out. In your booklet, I have provided a much longer list of intellectual, moral, physical, emotional, and psychological, and social development characteristics of the adolescent. I'm not going to go through each of these with you. What I put on the slide in front of you is kind of a summary in a lot of ways of some of the really important characteristics that you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with these different age groups. One thing that you might notice is that these planes, the first plane and the third plane of development, they mirror each other in a lot of ways. Because the growth that occurs in children at these ages occurs so rapidly, first plane children tend to have very fragile bodies and very rapid growth. When you get to the third plane in adolescence, again, very fragile bodies, very easily ill. So that's a physical characteristic to keep in mind. Adolescents become very physically and emotionally vulnerable during this time because of all of the changes. Their brain is just rewiring itself constantly. They become very vulnerable. They are humanistic and societal explorers as adolescents because they are at this time just beginning to emerge into adulthood. Dr. Montessori said that they are reborn when they become adolescents into new people. And they are reborn into adulthood, essentially. And so what they start doing during adolescence is they start exploring what it is to not just be a member of a family, but to be a member of a society, of a community. This becomes really vital and very important for them. They become very sensitive to social order and how communities, how groups of people that live and work together order themselves? What rules do they establish? What standards do they establish? How do they interact with one another? This becomes incredibly important for the adolescent. And they explore societal standards. What this means is, if you go back to the first plane, when it comes to moral development, the first plane, essentially, they take moral directives. They take orders. Essentially, a child between 0 and 6, you tell them what to do, they do it, usually. By the second plane, between 6 and 12, they usually start to fight back a little bit. You give them a moral directive, you tell them to do something, and they might argue with you on whether or not they really should do that thing that you are telling them to do. That's them exploring those moral standards that you are telling them exist. By the time you get to the third plane with adolescents, when you're dealing with morality and moral development, they begin to explore societal standards, which means they're not just exploring the rules and the directives that you are giving to them. They start exploring what other people are actually doing in relation to those rules and standards. They start watching adults, especially, very closely to see if we follow rules and standards that we try to make them follow. That's where they start to explore that the societal standards, and they start to explore society in general because they are learning to become members of a society. And they need to go through this period of exploration. So Maria Montessori said during this time of adolescence, when they are so physically and emotionally and psychologically vulnerable, when they are social explorers and they have this great need to understand what it means to live in a society, she said they have two basic needs. It can all boil down to two things. Protection during the time of this difficult transition from childhood to adulthood, and for an understanding of the society which they are about to enter. So I read that, when I first read that, I was a little confused. Because I thought, why should we protect adolescents from a society that they are trying to understand and that they are supposed to understand? How do these two things go together? But what I realized is that these two things go together perfectly, because what she is trying to say is that adolescents need an ideal community environment in which to grow and work and coexist with their peers during this time. So if you're setting up an ideal community of adolescents, within that, they are safe to explore society. They are safe to explore societal standards and morals and rules. And they begin to develop a sense of what an ideal society can even look like, and how an ideal society can even work. And so the hope is that if adolescent teachers, guides, practitioners will create these environments for them that both protect them and help them understand society, that as they become adults, that it is those societies, those moral societies, that they will begin to build in the world around them, in the greater world. So that is truly what Dr. Montessori is trying to express there, and that is what every adolescent program really tries to accomplish, regardless of where they are, what type of setting, whether they're on a farm or whether they are in a city. They're trying to accomplish that sense of community for adolescents to grow healthily. So with that, Dr. Montessori, she basically gave us an outline of what this type of adolescent program, this type of community could look like through describing a social organization and an educational syllabus for academic work. And some highlights from that plan that she gave. She encouraged schools to be physically separate from elementary schools. Or she encouraged adolescent programs to be physically separate from elementary. At Hudson Montessori, we're lucky enough that we have that little side campus that it's still with our main school. It's still close to the elementary, but we do have our own space over on the side in our own little two houses. And I have to tell you, that makes a huge difference. Because when our students go from upper elementary into middle school, they are able to physically remove themselves from the place of their childhood, physically remove themselves from the place of elementary school and go into a whole new environment. Into an environment specifically designed for adolescents. And they feel that change. And they need that push. They need that push to accept the fact that they are leaving childhood behind, because that can be a hard thing sometimes for them. But they need that little push, and they need us standing there in the middle school, pulling them in, bringing them in as they come. But that physical separation is so important. And within that, of course, Montessori described having that protected little mini society. What she wanted an adolescent program to be was essentially a little mini society, complete with an economy, complete with laws, which in middle school we usually refer to as community ethics, a student council that acts as a type of government in a sense. It's an actual small society that they have to live and work in together, and they have to make it work. And this is how they are able to explore morality and explore society like they need to. Dr. Montessori explained in so many terms that the classroom, which you typically have for upper elementary, or elementary in general, there's typically a classroom that becomes the prepared environment for elementary children. For middle school, that turns into an entire campus, if possible. They need both indoor and outdoor spaces. They need movement. Their rapid physical growth requires a lot of movement, and they need that movement. They need to be able to explore indoor and outdoor spaces quite frequently. And it needs to feel much more like a home as well, which is important because they tend to become kind of like family units in middle school. And having an environment that feels comfortable and more like a home is comforting to them during this difficult transition that they're going through in a lot of ways. The materials of a middle school become the tools of the adult world. So no longer are we using specific materials that have been designed for primary and elementary classrooms. When you get to the world of adolescence, those materials are actual tools of the adult world. They don't need those physical objects to help them understand abstract concepts anymore. So they're using computers, they're using shovels to dig into the soil. They're using real tools of the adult world at this point in time. And all of that together really enhances their entire development, their social, moral, physical, and intellectual growth. It is the whole person that Maria Montessori focuses on. So at this point, we can kind of walk you through what the social organization looks like at Hudson Montessori School, and then I'll show you what the educational syllabus looks like at Hudson Montessori School, which is where our academics come into play. Ray Montessori laid out a social organization, which you have in your booklet. Some of you may have opened to it already, but it looks like this top page here. This is what Maria Montessori outlined for social organization and the educational syllabus is in your booklet. So we can walk you through what these things look like at Hudson Montessori School. For social organization of an adolescent program, she outlined these elements that should be present in some way. The farm, the store, she mentioned a guest house, the quality of residential life, something called the Museum of Machinery, which I'll mention a little bit, and then of course the adolescents and adults. All of these components together create an organized mini-society. When it comes to the farm, I will say that she did set forth as her absolute ideal environment for adolescents is the farm. She believed that ideally they would all live and work on a farm together, and that there was something about that work that would help them to self-construct into moral adults. And there is some debate in the Montessori adolescent world about whether or not we should all be striving to end up on a farm as adolescent programs, or whether there is a place off the farm, in cities, in suburbs, where Montessori programs can exist. I will tell you, I am with the latter group in that. I believe that the farm is a beautiful, beautiful environment, and I understand why Dr. Montessori believed it was a perfect environment for adolescents. The work of the farm is meaningful, and they need that. The work of the farm, if you don't do your work, if you don't play your role and you don't do your part, plants and animals could die. So yeah, that's meaningful. And adolescents need meaningful work because just like adults, they don't like busy work. You know, they don't want to do something just because somebody's telling them to do something. They want work that's actually giving them purpose for existing within a community at all. A farm does that beautifully, and it gives them that connection to nature that they also really benefit from. But Maria Montessori also said that it's not the farm itself that is so valuable to the adolescent. It is the work of the farm that is so valuable to the adolescent. So in creating an adolescent program, I believe that the real task for anybody creating a program like this is to figure out how to find that level of meaningful work that gives the adolescent a deep sense of purpose in a community, how to find that within whatever setting you are in, any environment. So I'll walk you through what it looks like in a suburban environment. Hudson is basically a suburb. We're about 30 minutes from the biggest city, which is Cleveland, Ohio. Small town, and this is what it looks like where we are. So when it comes to the farm aspect, since we don't have an actual farm on our space, we do have gardens. We have raised bed gardens. They're behind that little building called Garden Lane that you saw. We plant a variety of things in these raised bed gardens. This is a list: tomatoes, zucchini, mint, strawberries, lettuce, peppers, cucumbers, herbs, raspberries, tea leaves. We plant a variety of things in these gardens, and students typically decide what it is we are going to grow. Right now we are working toward expanding our raised bed gardens and creating some more raised bed gardens, and we are trying to develop ways to give more purpose to these raised bed gardens. That's been a challenge that we have been facing, because what we really want as guides is for the students to be able to grow produce that they actually use on a regular basis in some way, because that's a problem we ran into with this kind of environment, is that we would use some of what we grew, and other food we just weren't able to use quickly enough that we were growing. So some things that we are working on currently when it comes to our gardens. We're working on getting that commercial kitchen that Kelly mentioned, getting that license, because if we do get that license, we will legally be allowed to create, to make products like pasta sauce, salsa, all kinds of different types of sauces that have extra legal requirements on them that require a certain type of kitchen in order to make them. And if we can make those types of products, it'll give more purpose to the ingredients that the students are growing. We're also talking to a local restaurant called 24 Karat, and we've been talking to the owner of this restaurant about the possibility of her purchasing produce that we grow to use in her food that she makes. She's an all organic, all natural restaurant, and she may be doing that as well as purchasing ingredients that she will then use to make lunches for our entire school, and then train our middle school students on how to make those lunches for the entire school. So those are the types of things that we're working on to give more purpose to our raised bed gardens and our farms. In addition to those raised bed gardens, as part of our farm element of our social organization, we have a greenhouse that went up recently, and unfortunately right before we left, a big windstorm came through, ripped the whole front part of our greenhouse off. So it doesn't look quite this nice anymore. We're trying to figure out how to fix that. But we do have a greenhouse to start seedlings in. Last summer we started using it to grow succulents, little desert plants. Because the greenhouse gets so hot in the summer, not much will grow in it this summer, but we found that succulents can grow in the summer in a greenhouse. And so our students decided to start growing them throughout the summer in there, and then they would pot them. Some students even made their own clay pots. But they would pot these little succulent plants, and they're really adorable. And they ended up selling them to different customers. Let's see, we have some other elements on our campus. It's always nice to have a shed for storing gardening equipment. Things like that as well. We do have compost. We do have compost bins. I'll mention these. Here's the laser. I'll mention the compost bin a little bit later when we're talking about something called occupations. Also, as part of our farm, we have bees. This is something that's very easy to do if you don't have a full-blown farm and you can't have cows and pigs and chickens and ducks and all of these things. Bees can work in a very small environment, and the world needs more bees. So we currently, actually this number should be 4. We currently have 4 healthy beehives now. Just not too long ago, before winter hit, one of our hives decided to split into 2. So a whole half of the hive left and swarmed one of our trees. And Amy Fagan, who is our microeconomy coordinator and one of our math guides, she's the one that does all of the bees. She manages this. She went out and learned how to do it. So she ran inside. She got some students. She's, quick, we have extra frames in the basement to put these bees in. And they all ran into the basement, brought out these frames, put on their bee suits really quick, got the smokers going, managed to get all of those bees that came out of that hive into another hive, and they're still thriving. I guess they just couldn't coexist with that original hive any longer. So now we're up to 4 healthy hives, and it's been absolutely wonderful. Our honey is a really big seller. We sell out of honey almost immediately when we have it, and the students have all kinds of different options and things that they can make out of the beeswax. They create candles out of them, and of course bees, just as an element of your farm and your program, bees provide so many different possibilities for academic explorations as well, which is absolutely wonderful. Our students have studied bee anatomy. They can look at pollination and different aspects of environmental sciences. We even, last year, Amy Fagan and myself, we collaborated on a study that the students did that combined the understanding of how a beehive operates with an understanding of how American society operates. And we compared the beehive to actual society and used that as a springboard to learn a little bit more about government and law and how our society works, which was very interesting. And we've done all kinds of creative writing and art and also geometry. It's wonderful to learn through what the bees naturally create. So these have been great. Oh, I forgot I had these pictures here. This, I don't want to talk too much about bees, but I know you're not here to learn about bees. But there is a sort of magic to bees. And I don't know if it's just bees or if it's just having animals in general around adolescents that they respond to so well. But for us, our animals are bees. And there is something magical about him. This young man, his name is Justin, and he is an 8th level student. He's going to be leaving us for high school next year. Wonderful young man, terrified of bees. Just a phobia of bees. He would walk down the sidewalk in between our buildings, which is a good maybe 10 meters from the nearest beehive. And he would walk kind of like this, going from building to building. He was terrified of these bees. But something happened to him as he would watch other students work with them, and he would watch them put on those bee suits and use the smokers and see that they could tend to the bees and take care of the bees and still come out okay. And he started to see the products of those bees, the honey that was being made, the wax that was coming out of it. He got excited about the bees, and he still wouldn't go near them, but he definitely started to warm up to them a little bit. So these pictures I took one afternoon at the end of the school year last year. It was springtime, and this was actually when that one hive split into 2 hives. So we had this branch. These pictures aren't real clear, but I think it's right in here, is the swarm of bees hanging out in this branch. And this was right at the end of the school day, and our students were leaving to go home, except for the ones that were running to get all the supplies and equipment to save this batch of bees. But Justin, he ran out and got his little sister, who was in elementary, went out to his parents' car, got her, said, "Come on, you have to see this." And he ran her right up to that swarm of bees. He was just less than a meter away from him. And he was so full of joy. I don't know if I've ever seen Justin as joyful as he was in that moment. And I don't know for him if it was because, maybe part of it was because he conquered his fear in that moment, and he got so close to them and realized it was okay. And I don't know, but I think that I've never seen him that joyful. And the other students began to rally around Justin as well, as you can see. And got really excited to see just how full of joy he was about it. So there is a little bit of a magic to bees, a little bit of a magic to this whole element of having farm elements in an adolescent program. There is something to be said about adolescents having that exposure to nature on a regular basis, getting their hands dirty, getting in the soil, working with animals. They benefit from it deeply in ways that we might not even fully understand yet. Another aspect of a Montessori program when it comes to the social organization that Montessori described is residential life. In the U.S., in the United States, boarding schools never have really taken off. We do have some boarding schools, but most of them are high school years. So the idea of middle school students leaving their families and going to live in a boarding school and experience residential life, Hershey does that, but not many schools do because it just hasn't gone over very well in the States. It's not very popular. So most Montessori adolescent programs have to figure out ways to incorporate aspects of residential living into their programs. And these are really valuable when you're dealing with adolescents. There's something to be said about what happens to an adolescent when they do leave their home and they leave their family and they separate temporarily every once in a while from their family and just exist within a community of their peers. That is what is so powerful for the adolescent that residential life is talking about, that Maria Montessori is talking about when she talks about the importance of residential living. It's that they need to start to step away from their family at this point, to figure out who they are on their own, because they're starting to become aware of the fact that they are not just a member of their family, they're a member of a society. And they need to feel that, and they need to experience it. So we don't have residential living at our school, but we do some other things that at least incorporate elements of this into our program. We have, each year we take some trips. At the beginning of the year, right at the beginning of the year, we'll take a community building trip all together that usually is 4 days, but we're looking to expand on that a little bit and to start to make it longer and longer as we grow. But we often go to the state of West Virginia, which is very mountainous, and we do things like whitewater rafting, we go zip lining. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that here, but we do a lot of adventure, and we learn a little bit about the area that we are in as well. We're currently talking about next year going to Costa Rica instead of West Virginia, and spending some time in the rainforests of Costa Rica, doing some place-based studies there. But those trips are something that get them away from their homes and just together to exist as a community of peers. Later in the year, we go on another almost week-long excursion. So sometimes we go to New York City when they're studying immigration. We're going to go to New York City a few weeks after Kelly and I get home. But we take them to New York City to study U.S. immigration. Other times we go to Washington, D.C. when they are studying peace. They study peace and civic life and the history of war all together. So we'll take them to Washington, D.C. so that they can see the government buildings. They can see the war memorials. They sometimes meet their congressperson and government representatives. And those are really magical times. This is when we were at the, there's a Vietnam War memorial in Washington, D.C. It's a black, just a shiny black granite wall with names etched into it. It's a very powerful memorial, actually. So we were taking the students past this memorial, talking a little bit about the design of it and how it's meant to make the viewer respond to it. And an actual veteran from the Vietnam War, a man who fought in the war, was standing there, and he turned to our students and he just began telling them his story, and began telling our students about his friends that he went to war with and lost. And it was really a powerful moment for the students. But they don't get to experience that kind of stuff when they're sitting in the classroom. They experience it when they go away and they go out. But these trips can be very powerful for them. We also have other aspects of residential life in our community. We do practical life, which is chores. This is something where the students are essentially responsible for taking care of their own learning environment. So they sweep the floors, they do the dishes, they do the laundry. They wipe down the tables, and they take care of their own physical space, just like they would if they were living there. We have community lunch once a week. We're working on having this more, but this is where students, I think Kelly mentioned this, where students will cook lunch in the kitchen. There'll be 3 students that will make lunch for the entire middle school community, and then we sit down together and we enjoy that lunch together almost as a family. And moments like that, even when lunch is not cooked by some students, we still sit down like a family and eat lunch together in the middle of the day at the school. We use real plates, placemats, real silverware that all gets washed afterward. It makes it like a home, not like an institution where you're going to a cafeteria and eating from disposable containers. It makes it like a home and like a family. And then we offer something at our school too called Quiet Study. So this is an extension of the school day. Even when students can't live there and they can't stay there all evening and into the night, we've at least extended our school day, which ends at 3:30 in the afternoon. We allow it to go until 5 p.m., 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so some students will stay after and they study together, they do their homework. One of the guides is always staying with them to be a resource. And it just gives them a chance to not go home right at the end of the school day, but to stay there, and they'll have a snack together and just be able to be together a little bit longer and get their work done. So that's another way that we've responded to the need for a residential quality of our program. We also have a lot of Montessori Adolescent programs have advisory as part of their program approach. And we have an advisory as well. What this means is that we take a larger community of students and we break them down into smaller groups. That one guy, this is me. This was my advisory group one year. But one guide will have a few students that they will become the advisor for. And so these small groups of students will sometimes get together and talk about special topics. They'll talk about challenges with the work they're doing, with homework. They will just have discussions. They'll get to know each other. They'll talk about their weekends and things like that. But it does help to build an even bigger sense of just community and family within the school to have a system like this where guides also act as advisors to certain students. And we have counsel, which is kind of an element of residential life in the school, but this is where all the students get to have a say in how their little community actually operates. And so they come together every once in a while. We do it once every 2 weeks. We all sit together in a circle, and students will manage this. So in this case, this is Vanessa, and she is sort of the council chair, and she is running council. And students will bring up issues. They talk about the work that they have done. They talk about their business that they are running. They'll bring up issues that they want to discuss. If they don't like the way that something is happening, they will bring it up at council, and we all talk about it and have a discussion. But they actually have a say in their community life in this way. And this is also kind of acting as that mini government that they are meant to run in this little mini society. So that's how we deal with residential life. And Kelly's going to talk a little bit about another important element of the adolescent program, and that is the store, which we refer to as the microeconomy.
All right, so Dr. Montessori did spend some time talking about the fact that as the adolescent grows, they need to learn how production and exchange works in order to understand the adult world. And so we offer that with our microeconomy in our store. In fact, this year, Adam has taken the microeconomy and tried to make it more of a focal point for what we're doing. So just because if the students really enjoy it, we can tie a lot of the different subject areas to it. And so we've been working on seeing how that goes. So what we do produce right now, and again, you can see there's Amy Fagan on the side, our microeconomy coordinator. We have jam, honey, mint tea. This year we made jewelry that we sell. We have a farmer's market on Saturdays that goes through August into October. And we usually have a front fair that we put the students at, and the students try to sell their products to the local community. Greeting cards, we have a literary magazine, coffee shop, seasonal holiday products, all of these things, but these are products that the students themselves come up with and decide on how they want to make the product and how they want to sell the product. So this is how it was divided. So again, Adam put a lot of time into figuring out how to make the microeconomy even more worthwhile than it already was. And so this may also be in your booklets as well. So he's broken it down into 4 different divisions. And so the students, in fact, right now, we are not focused so much on microeconomy as we are focused on entrepreneurial classes. Amy has been teaching them how to write resumes. We recently looked into advertising and marketing and how students themselves at the age they're at are being marketed to. But at the beginning of the year, we broke everything down into these 4 areas. Students would apply, just like you would for a job, to see where their interest was, and would go from there. So we have arts and crafts, and this year they focused on making ceramics for the succulents that we talked about. They focused on making jewelry, and they made cards. They handcraft their own cards and have packets of 5 that they sell. This is our newest one this year, and because of our long history at Starbucks, this is our hospitality division. And so we started a coffee business this year, and it's really successful, and it's very easy. You don't have to work at Starbucks to do this. This is really good. The students really love this. Our vision is that we would like to have a guest house and residency weeks, and we'll talk more about that. We have a service division, which has really been Adam's jewel. And so, I mean, clearly the things the students are doing in service, very, very impressive, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, we still have our farm, the backbone of our microeconomy, where we have the gardens, the exchange out. We have a little shed, which we call the exchange, where students will sell goods on Friday afternoons to families as well. Animals, bees, and of course, we really, really do want to have chickens. We have the space to have chickens, but the way Hudson is right now, with the regulations and rules, it doesn't look like it's going to be a go. So we're going to try to figure out what we can do. The students have already looked into it too, of course, to see what they can do, to talk to city council and see if there's any pushback, anything that can be done, so we'll see. On top of this, so we have these 4 divisions that students are working in. At the same time, we have broken it down into division of labor, into committees that would meet on Mondays. So our microeconomy time starts Monday morning at 8:30, or actually I should say more like 9 o'clock. And it goes for 2 hours. And during that 2-hour period on Mondays, we have the committees meeting. And so students that might be a part of these divisions will be split up and be part of these committees. Production, what do we need to be making? What new products can we sell? What do we have in the gardens that we can start, creating to sell? We have finance. Our head of school is awesome. He has come over on Mondays and helps be the finance guide to help the students. The students write the checks, they balance our books, and he's just there to kind of guide them through the process. He's shown them how to use Excel. I mean, it is really, really impressive. They write us checks if we purchase anything. It's truly amazing. Marketing, we've learned all about how to be better at selling our products. We still have some work to do here for sure. Justin, who Adam spoke about earlier, I think would really like to start a web page for us so we can sell our products online. And so we'll see how that goes. And of course, we have our managers. We have students that apply to be managers of each of these divisions. And so they're the ones in charge of a work list every week. What needs to be done? What roles, cleaning, whatever the case may be, what do people need to be working on? So it was an experiment this year, and so we've seen parts of it that will probably change for next year, but it's good to try things, right? Like if you don't ever try anything, you'll never know. And so I think this was good. So here's hospitality. So this is where with the students, we came together. We bought 2 espresso machines, and so right now, the students came up with the design process, they came up with drink orders, but we bought 2 espresso machines, and we're selling to the staff mostly on Friday afternoons. And so what we really would like to see happen, the students want to see happen, is that we do a hardline cafe, which that would be really something. But they want to go to the parents when they come to pick up their students at the end of the day and sell them coffee. It's a big undertaking. For now, though, they're really successful at doing staff drink orders. And so they've learned customer service skills. The espresso machines have a slight bit of danger to them. If you don't put the portafilter in right, it can kind of explode, which is super exciting for an adolescent. So. But yes, they're making artisan drinks. We really pride ourselves. I think the highlight for our students this year was that they make drinks better than Starbucks. And so And we have a local partnership with Heartwood Coffee, so we use their beans to actually make, so the students are very excited about that. But it's great, it's really, and we had a lot of students try to filter in. I think the other highlight is that, yes, we do it on Friday, but having other special events to go to. The students did a family dance this year, and I mean, it was very busy. Like you could, I mean, they just, this is, I mean, that was their movement. Like I could tell they were just a sense of urgency. So awesome, it was so awesome. Again, in the future, we really hope to have a guest house. The house that we're renting right now, we would secretly like to see that turn into a guest house. Montessori talks about the importance of students running a guest house. Again, showing that grace and courtesy, you know, having breakfast in the morning, having to take care of, you know, the people, just that whole idea of having that opportunity. And so we really would like to see that happen too. Visiting teachers who come and stay. We could do school exchanges, but it would be like a little bed and breakfast that the adolescents themselves are the ones in charge of. And then finally, this is another part of our vision we'd really like to see happen. Because we see the importance of having the students have times to be away from their families. A week-long residency program, which would still be in the house that we're currently renting. But it would be maybe just a week-long residency, but students would have opportunities to have culinary week, makerspace week, art week, whatever the case may be, but they would live together. So again, those opportunities for residential life that Adam talked about, taking them to New York, taking them to DC is great, but offering more of those if it's possible. It's really convenient for us because we are married. And so I think that, you know, makes it easy for us to see this. I know sometimes, I remember in my training going, oh my gosh, but this is just the vision. And I think the vision is good. It's good to have those ideas that you hope to see happen. And this is you, sir.
Okay, that fourth division of our microeconomy is our service division. And this is not a division of our microeconomy that is intended to make money. What it does is it collects some of the money that is made in the other parts of the microeconomy, the coffee business for hospitality, the farm. Each of those areas of microeconomy feed into the service division of microeconomy. And the students who are working in this particular division, they find ways to give back to the community in some way. Right now, I have a couple pictures up there, but right now our service division is doing things like some of our students will go to the children's house or lower elementary classrooms. They help our younger students learn how to read, or they read to them. In that way, they give back to our actual school community. They extend beyond the school community and interact with the greater community of Hudson and the surrounding areas. Right now, our service division is working to help train a service dog. This is Annie. So they meet with Annie once a week, and they are helping to train her to work in a children's hospital nearby, to go and to be a presence at that children's hospital. We have some other students as one aspect of service that are working on a project that is meant to help local refugees who are coming into Cleveland, our nearby city, from various other countries to escape countries of their own. And our service division really had a heart for these refugees coming into our area and wanted to help in some way, specifically with the children of refugees who were displaced and finding themselves in a new place. And so they're working with a government agency now, actually called the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And they've come up with this idea to get backpacks like kids wear to school and fill those backpacks with all kinds of little educational supplies and little toys and games and things that would be useful for a refugee child coming into the area for the first time. And then they're going to distribute those backpacks to these children in the area. So these are the types of things that our service division does for our microeconomy. And it's a term, it's something that we call social entrepreneurship. So whereas the rest of the microeconomy, the rest of the business really helps them to develop a sense of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial skills, which involves creative thinking and problem solving and being courageous enough to form an idea and actually try to see that idea to completion. The rest of the business is helping them to develop that kind of a mindset. Social entrepreneurship is about a mindset that is related to figuring out how you can use those skills of problem solving and creative thinking for the greater good of society. And what you see here on the screen really is just a progression from 7th level to 9th level in the middle school of how the microeconomy nurtures the mindset of an entrepreneur, which we feel is very important in our program. In 7th, they focus on just that, the microeconomy program itself in the school. And so right now, our 7th level students are getting ready to develop projects where they're going to come up with new product ideas for the business, and they're going to come up with a marketing plan for their new product idea. They're going to be presenting it to the whole community to decide what's going to be made next year, what products are we going to sell. By 8th level, the students begin to expand and they start working with local businesses outside of our school. So our 8th level students right now are getting ready to do internships at local restaurants, local stores, and different businesses so that they can actually get out and work with the greater community as part of their business. And then our hope is that we're in talks about bringing on a 9th level in our program. We currently don't have a 9th level, but we're working on it and we're getting very close to being ready for that. And at that point in time, the service division will become something that the 9th level students do. And in this case, they will begin to expand even beyond the local community into developing global perspectives and seeing how they can make a difference in the greater world outside of the school and outside of Hudson. So that's what we're working toward with the service division. Okay, I think I'll do one more slide here, and then I wouldn't mind taking just a little bit of a break for a few minutes, just so everybody can get up and get the blood flowing again. Part of the social organization is this thing that Maria Montessori referred to as the Museum of Machines. And a really interesting concept that some people find really fascinating, while others find really confusing and unnecessary. But what Dr. Montessori really was talking about when she wrote about a museum of machines in an adolescent program was the fact that she thought it was really important for adolescents to understand how inventive and creative humans can be and have been throughout history, and how we have developed technology, and that technology has advanced. We have invented ways to make our work easier and more productive. And she used the terms museum of machinery to emphasize the fact that as they are becoming adults, they need to understand this and be inspired by it. They need to understand that developing and using technology of various kinds is part of adult life. It is part of living in an adult world, in an economy. But she also believed that our technological progress as human beings had far surpassed our moral development. And that's what led to both world wars. That's what led to the atomic bomb. That's what led to the Holocaust. We as a human race had not progressed morally as fast as we had progressed technologically. And so that's a big piece of what the Museum of Machinery is her wanting young people to really truly understand what technology is and how we can use it and how we can use it responsibly. And part of that is understanding how it develops and how it evolves and how humans build on the technology that they have developed to create something even better, and then they build on that to create something even better. it's kind of like an understanding of the history of human technology. So we approach this in various different ways in our program. One thing that I have done with a student named Jake, who you see right here, he was really interested in computers. He still is. I still talk to Jake sometimes. And he's absolutely fascinated by computers. And we have this one Apple laptop that barely worked anymore in our program. And so at the end of the year, the students were all developing project ideas to work on. And Jake and I decided to work together on taking this Apple computer, taking it apart piece by piece by piece, suspending it in this wooden frame that we both built together so that each piece is floating on a different level, and then labeled. And he created a binder that shows what each piece does in the computer itself. So this is really just a model explaining how a laptop even works and what all of the pieces and parts do. And so he was able to teach the other students about that by using this visual example. And it's kind of a work of art, too, in our communities. It's very sculptural, interesting to look at. Other things we have done, we have, as a creative expression from an art class, students have learned about typewriters. Did a whole class on typewriters, which you would think would be so completely boring to a teenager. But the ones that did this, they just fell in love with typewriters, and they were learning how to fix typewriters, and they started to write poetry on the typewriters. They fell in love with that manual aspect of it, not being digital, and you can't go back and erase what you just did. You just have to keep going or start over again. And they absolutely love these typewriters. And we even took them to a local print shop that prints large-scale, book orders and things like that. And they were able to look at modern-day printing equipment and to be able to see that progression from writing, really, all the way through to typewriters, to computers, and to large industrial-sized printing machines, and able to see it in that way. So that's how we handle the Museum of Machinery in our program. It just takes a lot of creative thinking and finding ways to do it. With that, we're going to come back, and then leading up to lunch, Kelly and I will talk about our educational syllabus. So this is where we're going to get into how we handle academics in our program. So let's take maybe a 10-minute break. We'll take a 10-minute break. I'll see you back
10 to 11.
At 10 till 11. Okay, see you then. Which is a 2-year cycle that you'll see in a few slides ahead as well. This is how our week is currently laid out, and it has been similar to this for the past few years. We usually make little adjustments each year, but for the most part it works out to be this type of schedule. And to break it down for you, we usually focus Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. We call those academic days. So those are days where in the mornings they rotate between math and language. It's their psychic development. They also take a foreign language, which at our school is Spanish. But their mornings, they rotate between math and language, so we typically split our students into 2 groups, and one group will stay for language arts, and the other group will go and do mathematics, and then they flip. But they're getting that complete picture of psychic development in those morning periods. After lunch and after a little bit of a sort of free open period where they can do whatever they want, the afternoons are spent in either humanities or science. So we'll do a humanities project that will last about 3 weeks at a time typically, and all of the students will be working in that humanities project. And then once it is over, we switch over to science, and we'll work through a science unit for a few weeks, and then it'll go back to humanities, and we rotate back and forth in that way. Our period of time that we have for humanities and science is about 2 hours and 15 minutes long each time we have it. So it will typically start with a short lesson, but a lot of the work that they do in those areas is heavily project-based. We do practical life at the end of the day, every day, and then I talked a little bit about quiet study that's available to students as well. On Wednesdays, we have dedicated Wednesdays almost entirely to self-expression, to that aspect of the educational syllabus. So Wednesday tends to be their favorite day of the week. They come in the most excited to be alive on Wednesdays. And we've broken down personal expressions, self-expression, that Dr. Montessori talked about, into two different areas. So in the morning hours on a Wednesday, they'll focus on physical expression. And these are a variety of different things that involve physical movement. And Kelly will talk a little bit more about what some of those options are here in a moment. But then in the afternoon, we have creative expressions, and those tend to be more artistic options that they have to work with. We also will have our advisory meetings on Wednesdays, or sometimes we just give them a period of quiet reading where we actually ask them to just sit in silence for 45 minutes and read. We'll either do that or we'll meet in our little advisory groups and have discussions. On Fridays, we have dedicated in the morning time to, again, to psychic development and moral education. So students rotate between a math seminar, which is where they're given a math problem, but it's a word problem. And they all have to try to figure out a solution to the problem, but they discuss how each of them came to a solution so that they can see that there are many different ways to come to the same answer. And they share those different ways with each other. And then they'll go from math seminar into a current events seminar, which is part of how we address the moral education in our program. And that is where they will bring in articles that are current articles in the news. And they bring in summaries of those articles. They bring in questions that they have about those stories and the articles. And they have discussion with one another in a circle. And the guide typically sits outside of that circle and just observes as they have this conversation with one another on sometimes some pretty deep issues about what's happening in the world. We also have music or ensemble on Wednesdays and Fridays. There's a little bit of a period for that. And then all Friday afternoon is microeconomy time where they run their business. We have a little bit of time on Monday mornings as well where that takes place. So the week is kind of, I see it as like bookends on a shelf that hold all the books together. That's what microeconomy is in our week. We start our week with microeconomy by taking a look at what needs to be done with the business they are operating, and then we end the week with the work of the business that they are operating. Because that microeconomy, that business that they run together is, and our program is really becoming a central aspect of the program, because the business is where so much of the academic learning they do, the science, the math, the culture they learn about in the humanities, all of it kind of comes together and comes alive through the microeconomy, through the business that they're running. It's where they're able to apply that academic knowledge in a real way, where they're not just memorizing facts and memorizing things. They're actually applying what they're learning mathematically and scientifically to the production of goods and to selling those goods. So it's really become a much larger part of our program. Right, so we'll just, that was an overview. Now we'll get into just a little bit more of the details of these aspects of our educational syllabus, and Kelly will talk a little bit about self-expression and some of the options we offer.
Self-expression for the adolescent is really wonderful because they are at that point right now where they're really willing to be creative. They're willing to take risks, that they're willing to put themselves out there in a way that as you hit a certain age, you no longer are. And so it's very exciting for them. We try to give them lots of opportunities to experience many different things. And again, with specialists, you know, adults that are not normally in their environment all the time. so Ryan Zarecki, he comes in sometimes and allows the students to do archery, and so they get that experience. So like what Adam was talking about, the notion of physical expression in the morning and then creative or personal expression in the afternoon, we get them up moving around. This year we offered a class, physical comedy, where the students, we have mats and they learn how to do a lot of the, falling over and how not to hurt themselves, but they love that. They love dance, and I have watched adolescent boys, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound sexist, but I have watched them boogie down in a way that I just did not know, but it's really, they don't, again, it's that whole age, it's that wonderful age of just willing to try out new things that you've never experienced before. So we do things like that. They do core sports or court sports where they learn how the rules for a specific game. In the afternoon, we do creative expressions. So some of the students will take part in making their community lunch. So they plan out the menu, they get the ingredients, they go through the whole process of cooking. We also have art classes that we offer, so they learn how to paint in a different way, whatever the case may be. Right now, Amy and I are doing a class called Making It. It was a show in the States with Amy Poehler and Nick Offerman, and they had people come out, so we pretend like we walk around and ask, like, so what are you doing right now? Pretend like they're on a video team. They loved it. We took them to a thrift store, they bought some product, they turned it into beautiful artwork. Like, it was really quite amazing, and they just love that. Like, they're just something else. We also have ensemble and indie arts on Wednesdays. Ensemble, again, is with Mr. Rhodes, and so they bring in their instrument, they play. Because we wanted to give the students choice, because choice is so important to the adolescent, Adam offered up indie arts, which is, again, just another opportunity for students to be creative. This year, they put, the students came together and made an escape room that we offer to the community on Saturday mornings. So the students came up with the clues of how to get out of the room. It was called The Ghost of the North House. Our house is very old, and so, but they did it, and they actually ran it on Saturday mornings and had people come through. Right now, they're doing artwork for an auction that we're having, so it's pretty impressive. And so yes, and the artistic extensions. We try to offer art to the students during humanities and language arts and during the science projects too. We think it's still really important to have that creative component throughout. So just because they're at that age, they're ready for it. Okay.
And self-expression is so important to the adolescent that sometimes it just erupts spontaneously, whether you're offering them a specific time to do it or not. I find that happening really frequently in our environment. They're just so prone to expressing themselves in creative ways. This was a moment, just as an example of this, where they were spending an afternoon in humanities and they were giving presentations, because often at the end of a humanities study, they all present to each other and share with each other what they learned throughout the process. And they were doing these presentations and they were sitting for a very, very long period of time, and I could tell they were getting kind of antsy and needed to move around a little bit. So I told the students to take a 5-minute break. I said a quick 5-minute break. It was snowy outside, it was cold, but the sun was shining, and so it was a beautiful day, and I really encouraged them. I said, you know what, just put on your coats and go outside for 5 minutes. Take a break, get fresh air, come back in, and we'll do more presentations. Well, I walked away and eventually looked out the window and recognized that they were all, they had gotten together and were building a snowman, which is common in our area. But they put together a whole snowman in just 5 minutes. And in just that period of time, in that 5 minutes too, they had come up with the role that each person played in this group effort. Really within the first minute, I think, that they got out there, they did this. So we had a leader who was giving orders. We had people who were running off to find sticks and running inside to grab somebody's scarf, and somebody to find things that could be used for a face and buttons on the front of it. And they were all working together to build this snowman within 5 minutes time. And then they came back in and did the rest of their presentations. It was just a spontaneous moment of creativity. And those are the kinds of moments that you frequently find in an adolescent program, and why self-expression is so important. They're just naturally drawn to it and they need it. There's something in their developing souls that need to be able to be creative and to express themselves. Moving on to psychic development, talk a little bit about what math, language arts, and moral education look like in our program. With math, we have 2 guides for math, and our students are typically separated into 3 groups for the most part in math. They progress in math at their own pace, but usually they end up being broken up into groups where one group is studying pre-algebra, another group will be doing algebra, and another group will be doing geometry. And within each of those forms of math, all of the students in those groups are at a different level. They go at their own pace. They move on when they're ready to move on to the next concept. But we have 2 math guides that lead them and coach them through that process. And there are also, as I mentioned, math seminar that takes place where they collaborate on word problems. And they also do some project-based math work in our program as well, which is usually very helpful for them because that's just another way for them to see how math is actually applied to real life. That they're not just learning how numbers work from a textbook, but they're understanding why math is important. And so they have done various types of projects. Our math guides have had them do things like create scale maps of our campus so that we can begin to map out where to place new raised bed gardens, where to do different things, but they have to figure out how to create a map that is perfectly to scale of the campus. Various things like that. A lot of the math projects work into our microeconomy as well, doing cost analysis on potential new products is one math project that they frequently do. So it's a good way. I think it's important for them to really understand how math is used in the real world. When it comes to language arts, we typically focus on 4 different areas of language when we have dedicated workshops in language arts. So we work a lot on writing, the written language, on speaking, through presentation giving and speech giving. We work on body language with the students, and we try to coach them on how to have poise, how to be confident when they are speaking, how to have diction in their voice, things like that. And we also work on critical thought as a part of language arts. And that happens a lot through literature. So they do a lot of writing, they do a lot of speaking, they do a lot of acting and drama, and then they also read a lot of literature. And in literature, they're not just learning to read better, but they are learning to question and critically question an author and how to read closely into something. And so in our program, they're almost always reading a novel. So they'll read a novel in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And when that novel is done, they have a formal seminar on that novel where they sit in a circle and they all bring questions and page references, and they have an intellectual conversation about that seminar or about that novel that they read. And when it's done, they start on a new novel and they go through the process again. Throughout each novel, they also learn literary devices. They learn how to analyze themes, how to analyze character, how to analyze setting. All of those different literary devices that are so important to know. So they work through those aspects of literature. With writing, it's similar. They're almost always engaged in a writing project of some sort. So they are almost constantly writing an essay or a short story or a series of poems. And this work is just ongoing throughout the year. It's very rare that we ever break from that work. It's good for them to keep moving forward in all of these different areas. And so they're frequently writing essays and stories, and we try as much as we can to make language arts integrated into the other academic areas and disciplines. So they're often, when they're often writing about something that's related to what they're doing in science, or they're writing about what they're doing in humanities. And the same goes for reading with the literature. They're about to study cells and genetics, or they started actually after we left. In science, they're starting to study cells and genetics right now. And so in literature and language arts, they're starting to read a novel called The House of the Scorpion, which in various ways is related to what they're going to be learning when it comes to genetics. And so we try to do that as much as possible, is to pair their literature with what they're studying somewhere else in the program. Because we feel that it's important as much as possible for them to see different academic disciplines as connected, not as these isolated areas of inquiry or isolated modes of understanding the world, but everything really is connected, and we try to help them understand that everything works together. And language arts is really a great area of the educational syllabus in which to do that, because language permeates every aspect of life. When it comes to moral education, as one part of psychic development, I've already mentioned current events that we have on Fridays. There are various ways that we address moral education. It's really just kind of organic in an adolescent environment. They're always learning about morality and about choices between right and wrong, and the guides are there to help coach them and guide them along through that. So there are various ways that they approach that. Maria Montessori, when she talked about moral education, she compared it to physical balance, which I thought was a really interesting way to look at it. She said, just like we need to have balance as humans when we stand up, we need to have balance when we move and when we walk. We need to have some sort of balance, some sort of equilibrium that keeps us up, that keeps us from falling down. She said morality is the same way. And that's what the adolescent is really sensitive to learning during the adolescent years, is that sense of balance, of being able to stand and to move through society and make the right decisions and the right choices. And so they get that through discussions that they have through seminars. We focus a lot on grace and courtesy in our environment, so we are constantly trying to coach them and just having empathy for others so that they can show grace toward others and courtesy toward one another. These are things that just happen throughout every day. It's not really an academic discipline. It just is a part of everything. Here's a little note that some students wrote. When I think of moral education, I think of this little note sometimes, but this was from last year. We take a group of students to the Montessori Model United Nations program that happens. We went to New York, and they participated in this conference for this Model United Nations. And some of the students, when we were checking out, they left this note in their hotel room to the people that clean the rooms. They just wanted to leave a special tip, some money, and a little note for the people that cleaned their rooms every day, just showing that gratitude for those people that played that little part in their time there in New York. But they recognized it. They recognized that there were these employees of the hotel that were helping to make their experience a valuable experience for them. And to me, it was such a precious, important moment of seeing them growing in their moral understanding of life and gaining that balance, that equilibrium, and understanding how to move through society with other people with gratitude and with grace. But the note says, dear room caretakers. They didn't really know what their job was even called. We would like to thank you. With smiles on our faces, we present to you a tip. Thank you for your hard work. The MMUN delegates is just referring to what they're called at this conference. But a very sweet effort and an example of language being used as an expression of their morality and moral education. Another aspect of our language arts program is drama. You want to mention this a little bit?
So again, kind of going back to the notion of self-expression too, but with the creative language, especially with the language piece, they are so ready to be creative. We just wrote poetry dealing with immigration, and they're ready for that opportunity to use the language in any way that they can. They're really receptive to it. And so on top of all the writing that Adam talked about, we also do a lot of performances, which is really awesome for everyone. The students being adolescents, they're ready to try on new personalities, just like they're ready to try on new experiences with art and with the physical expression. They're also ready to try to see who they are in society. And so a lot of the acting that they get to do lets them do that, whether it's somebody that they themselves create, a persona that they put on, or whether they research somebody and put on, tell that person's story in their words. They take that opportunity. Here, this is Hudson studies. So later on, Adam will talk about place-based learning, but one of the outcomes of it is that students actually put on a play that talks about what they've learned from Hudson's history, and so they become characters in the story. They become the real people. In the middle, we have our 20th century production. I am very excited because I am new to this. I taught theater at the high school level, but we're actually going to go, they go to an actual theater, Barlow Community Center, and they put on the whole entire production. They do the set design, they do costumes, they do the whole thing. And they write the script. So they do everything, and then put the performance on at the end of the year. This is our solstice presentation. Peace production. This is Peace production, which sometimes, depending on where it is, will be at the Barlow Community Center, or it's at, this particular year it's outside on the school grounds where the students perform. But they love doing it. They love putting on and using the language to create this person, to figure out who they are in society based on this person that they presented. So it's wonderful. The language part, the language piece, and the acting and the ability to just be creative is so important for them.
This is our 2-year cycle of humanities and science. As you saw on the weekly schedule, we rotate between science and humanities in the afternoons on academic days. This also is in your booklet. So we just refer to them as Year A and Year B. So 7th and 8th level students each experience both of these years as they go through the program. I have humanities on the top line here and topics that we typically address, and then science on the bottom with some notes about literature connections in the middle for each of these years. Humanities is an area of study where we mainly deal with 4 different themes. So with humanities, we don't necessarily move through human history chronologically. We look at human history, or what Montessori called the human story, through the lens of different themes. So we'll look at early agricultural societies quite often at the beginning of the year. Not every year, but sometimes often at the beginning of the year. We'll look at an early society, one that was developing along with the invention of writing, often river-based societies, so that they can get a bit of an understanding of how human societies developed in the first place when humans began to settle and developed agricultural methods and started to develop villages, which grew into towns, which grew into cities, which grew into states, which grew into empires. They kind of see the roots of all of that through that theme. And so next year we'll be studying, we're planning on studying ancient China, and we'll also have the option of ancient Mesopotamia, or the ancient Middle East area. So students will take a look at those, for example. Another theme of the 4 themes, we'll take a look at societies in transition, which is a pretty broad theme. A lot of societies are often in transition throughout history in some way. They just got done studying the Industrial Revolution in America, which is one of the topics we explore in this theme. So we really look at that transition from, in America, going from more of an agricultural, rural society into an industrialized and urban society, and look at that transition that takes place and what happens during that transition, and what challenges arise in society and how did people react to those challenges. We also, as one of the 4 themes, will deal with classical societies, which are really just societies that can be considered at the height of their sort of intellectual capabilities. So that could be something like, well, different periods in the history of various countries. Just when various countries are at that, what we consider sort of the height of sophistication. So we've studied ancient Greece before. We've studied the city of Alexandria is one that we'll study with this theme on occasion, which is a city in northern Egypt that was a crossroads of trade between areas of Europe, Africa, and Asia. And we take a look at what was happening in Alexandria in the ancient world that made it such a desired place to be for philosophers and writers and really intellectual people of society at the time. And then we also take a look, the 4th theme is the modern world. So we'll take a look at just the modern world in general. We're going to be getting into, this year, when we get back, we'll start looking at the 20th century. And students do an in-depth study of the 20th century by breaking it down decade by decade. And they take a look at what's happening in the world, who are the leaders, what is the economy like, what does human migration look like in that decade, who's moving where. All of those different aspects of society come into the limelight, and they look at issues of the modern world. Next year we'll be doing, as that part of the theme, we'll be doing what we call peace studies at the end of the year, and that's where they'll study, they'll focus particularly on the wars of the 20th century and the wars that happened around the world with an eye for conflict resolution. And how could this have been handled differently? And what were the effects of war on human society? But they see the effects of war on the modern world as they study these areas. The humanities is a really big part of our program. When our program was originally designed, it was really a humanities-centered program. And a lot of the biggest work that students do, they do in the humanities in terms of projects and research. So we thought we would just kind of give you an example of what a humanities project looks like. And Kelly will explain one that she just recently did with students called the Map of Salt and Stars, which is a brand new one that was done for the first time this year.
Well, again, I have a public school background. I taught for 12 years, and so this was really new for me, the opportunity to create a humanities project. I still come from the mindset sometimes, and I have to get out of it, that we need to prepare for a test. But in Montessori, there are no tests, and so that's a beautiful thing. But you are still trying to teach skills, and so, you know, I have to be reminded sometimes by Adam that the students aren't going to remember every detail, which hurts sometimes because I feel like they should. But I'm just trying to get them to understand, like, give them a skill that they can use later on. Well, this year, I read the book called The Map of Salt and Stars by Jennifer and Dana Carter, and that became sort of the centerpiece for our humanities project that dealt with the modern world. And so, what was really a struggle for me was the fact that I thought I had to do a lot of talking and lecturing and explaining, and I didn't. Instead, the students were given the book, we would meet and discuss, and they would pick out, you know, symbols in the book, like we would still talk about the figurative language that they needed to know. But when it actually came to the project work, I gave them topics that they could research, and they had choice, and they chose whatever they wanted. And they researched it and presented it to one another. And so, maybe they didn't learn every single detail that I felt like they needed to learn, but they still took away the notion of like learning how to research properly, learning how to set up a bibliography, and then, again, learning those skills of presentation and communication. So it's very exciting. Would you switch it, please? Go ahead and switch it again. Okay, so one of the parts that we did too, which again, I don't know how easy this is to do in a public school, but we did a culinary journey. And so with the help of Amy Fagan, her and I and the students kind of came together and just had food that was from the various areas that one of the characters in the novel goes to. And so we started off with a fattoush salad, and we ended with flan, which the students made themselves. And so, but just to kind of prepare them for what the tastes of the novel were going to be like. And so we invited, this is one of our special community lunch days, and we invite parents and things like that to come in. And like Adam said, again, mindset that they need to hear me. I need to be the big T on the stage. No, not true. We do a lot of seminars, and when we have seminars, I sit outside of the circle, and the students are the ones that, if you just give them the opportunity to start the discussion, they will. They don't need us to lead them down a path. They will do it themselves. They will talk in an elevated language. They will think deeply and critically. We just have to back away. So many times I want to speak up and say something to them like, but haven't you thought about this? If I just stop talking, they're going to get there. They're going to see it for themselves. A lot of this is trust. Trusting them that they're going to go, and discuss what they feel is important to discuss, and just backing away and letting them do it. This is one of the best seminars we've ever had. It was awesome. And I just backed away, and I kept my mouth shut. Somehow, miraculously, I contacted this author. She's brand new. This is her first novel that she's written, and she FaceTimed with us. I know, I'm sorry, I am going to make a big deal about that because I was so pumped. I just sent off an email. Imagine just taking the chance to send an email off, and lo and behold, she could be writing she could be writing some serious novels, and we had a chance to talk with her. And so it was a really great opportunity for the students. They came in with their own questions, and of course, they're awesome questions about writing and what that looks like, and what her, why she wrote the story the way she did. So it was super. Again, you can probably tell I was very pumped about it. It was very exciting. So again, like Adam talked about, trying to integrate. And again, I know in a public school sometimes this can be really challenging because you may not. I know for me at least, I would go into a classroom and I would close the door. I taught social studies for many years, and so fortunately I had a friend in the English department that her and I would get together a lot and talk about trying to collaborate. I don't know what public school is like here, but if you have somebody that's willing to collaborate with you, that is an awesome, awesome opportunity. And so because we are so big on collaboration, Amy, as a math, kind of interweaving math into it, we had the students make a map of where Nora goes through in the novel. And so she did scale with the students. You can see in here kind of starting to figure out what that looks like. She got huge maps for them to actually trace to these 18 by 18 cake boards that they had to work together to. That was the other thing. You have to make sure your lines are precise depending on what part of the country you actually have. And so a lot of it was that notion of precision and taking your time and working with others to make sure all of the colors and the, because we did it based on elevation. So there was a lot of work that had to be done. But eventually this is what we came up with. And we showed the author it too. And so and she put us on Instagram. I don't know why I'm telling you that, but it was very exciting. So, but this is the map. And of course immediately, because they are who they are very proud of their work, but they also saw, oh, this is what we would totally do different next time. This is how we can make this so much better, or so much easier, or whatever the case may be. And so they saw it, they were proud of it, but they also recognized, oh, we have to, if somebody's going to write this small, we can't write, something else gigantic. Like, we have to have more precision involved. And it was a real learning experience. It was an awesome learning experience. So you can see our It's not quite perfect, but it was still very good. So we had incorporated that math component in there as well. And then finally, you know, we were able to, at the time period, one of the art galleries up in Cleveland called the Transformer Station was having an exhibit done by a photographer. Her name is Rania Mader. She's Lebanese American, and so some of the artworks that she showed were adolescent girls in their rooms. And so some of the girls were in the States in their bedrooms, and some of the young ladies were in Palestine or in the Middle East in their bedrooms. And so it was an opportunity for our students to see that we are all way more alike than we are different. Because one high school or the adolescent girl's bedroom is going to be pretty similar in ways to another adolescent girl's bedroom. And so that was awesome. And they also had a chance to look at images of adolescent girls with their mothers too. And so we gave them some questions. They wrote down some journals. They did some journaling in their books about the connections that they were feeling. I feel like so much of what we do in Montessori is trusting that the student is going to do, they're just going to do it. It's just going to happen without, you know, I don't know, it's amazing. And then finally, because they do get to put on a winter solstice presentation, and they can do it over anything they want to, but I love reading, and I'm a little bit of a go-getter when it comes to literature, and so they decided they were going to do a whole play that was going to interweave all the novels that they did, and the big theme was going to be the journey. We read The Alchemist this year, Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, all kinds of stuff, but so they put on a whole production that wove all these stories in and out, and they acted out the characters. These two images in particular are from the map of Salt and Stars, just kind of showing the beginning of the story and the ending of the story. But it was wonderful. It was a great opportunity. And again, incorporating creative writing. Right here. She does concrete poetry, so at the beginning of all the chapters, she has a concrete poem that outlines the country that the character is getting ready to flee from or go into. And so we talked about concrete poetry, and we talked about it in the sense of, where are you coming from? Like, what does your neighborhood look like? Who are you in that neighborhood? And so one of the young ladies, she lives on a farm, and so her concrete poem was of a goat. And so, but just that creativeness. It was an awesome humanities project. I think the students really, they enjoyed themselves a great deal.
I'm just switching the PowerPoint back to the other one. This slide for one moment. Talk a little bit about science, which we do in rotation with humanities. As you can see, humanities is very big work. The map of Salt and Stars was one that allowed them to study and learn a little bit about history, current events through the refugee crisis that is focused on the novel, geography through the mapping, creative writing through the poetry, even art in the map making that they did. All of those things come together in the humanities. And it's a beautiful thing. It's great when they can do it in an experiential way, where they're not just reading about geography, they're actually creating a scale map of an area and paying attention to where are the rivers, where are the roads. And then in this case, it was beautiful for them to do that and then to be able to map the characters' actual routes in the novel as these refugee characters in the novel were fleeing from one country to another. So it's big work. With science, we try to do similar themes as in humanities, so that science and humanities seem related to one another, because they are related in a lot of ways. But for example, what I mean is that at the beginning of next year, our school year, when we start out by looking at some early societies, where students can choose to either study ancient China or Mesopotamia. We'll focus in the humanities on how these early societies often grew around rivers because water was so important to life and such a necessity in life. And that's where the first real villages began, settlements began, that grew into cities. And so when they go to science and start studying a science topic, they'll focus on water studies. And they'll study the properties of water. And so humanities and science are, they have a relationship in that way in our program as much as possible. With science, we handle science a couple of different ways in our program. In one sense, when it comes to science, we have certain national education standards that, that we need to at least pay attention to. So these are standards that the government agency has established that students need to learn at a certain age in order to have a basic foundation of knowledge they need when they go into high school, for example. So in science, they will sometimes focus on topics that are just part of those national standards. And a lot of them hit the same areas that Dr. Montessori outlined, because she essentially said when it comes to science, they should just learn everything. So they do hit those areas. So we typically, actually I should go back to that schedule real quick. So with science, we have year A, which typically focuses on life sciences. So they'll do environmental studies, astronomy, comparative anatomy, health, cell biology, genetics, plant biology. These are the types of topics they explore in science during 1 year. And then in the second year, they focus on physical sciences. So they'll take a look at geology, water studies, soil studies, weather and atmosphere, chemistry, and an introduction to physics. They'll look at force and motion. So when they study these topics in science, they typically will be doing a variety of things. They get lessons, they do labs and experiments, they do as much hands-on work as they possibly can. They have readings, background readings related to what they're learning, and they always engage in some sort of research project based on what they're learning, and they give a presentation at the end of it. So here's an example that I'll just walk you through really quickly of water studies, which they will do again at the beginning of next year, as I said. But this is a unit of science where they study the properties of water, and they do that in various different ways. And it usually starts at the beginning of the year in our trip to West Virginia. They'll start their actual science exploration of the study of water when we're in West Virginia, because we're near one of the oldest rivers in the world. It's called the New River. So we were named for one of the oldest rivers in the world, but when geographers were coming through the area and stumbled across this river, to them it was new. And it just came to be known as the New River. But it's one of the oldest rivers in the world. So they spent some time actually going into the water, and they study microinvertebrates, and they take a look at the organisms that live in the water there in West Virginia. And then they come home from West Virginia and they begin to take a look at our own water sources at our school, on our campus. We have a little pond behind our elementary building. And so last year when they did water studies, one of our students' moms, she works for an environmental agency. So she came out and she brought a boat, and students were able to go out onto that pond in a boat, and they used some different scientific instruments that she brought with her to test different aspects of the water and different properties of the water, and to measure the depth of the pond and things like that. They measure the pH, the acidity, the temperature. So they're really getting that hands-on work. They're not just reading about the properties of water, they're actually discovering it themselves. And they do various labs in the classroom during a science unit like this. labs on convection currents and water filtration, other unique properties of water. And oftentimes we try to have these field experiences as well, where we take them to different locations outside of the school. In this case, last year they went to a local water treatment plant where employees there gave them a tour of the plant and showed them the equipment. And they were able to see that a lot of the techniques they learned about in the classroom of filtering water were the same techniques that were being used in huge and very large plants, water treatment plants nearby the school. So we try to get them out as much as possible like that, to hear from specialists and to hear from people who are actually working in these areas that they are studying. And then with science, we also have a lot of interdisciplinary connections. I already mentioned thematically, we try to tie science and humanities together in some way as much as possible. But we also bring in other aspects of learning into sciences. So for water studies, as an example, they read a novel called A Long Walk to Water, which is about some Sudanese refugees in Sudan and Africa, and trying to find clean water to survive on. So they read that book, and then they also did art projects related to water. They learned watercolor painting technique and created some paintings in that way so that they would have that little bit of an artistic, creative expression to go along with their scientific studies. So that's one way that science happens in our program. Another way that science happens is through occupations. For occupations are really, they're hands-on projects that are meant to be oftentimes outdoors. They're projects on the land itself. They are more common on farm schools and in farm environments where there is a lot of work like that that needs to be done. But they're great hands-on projects for incorporating science into, because as Maria Montessori stated, she said, work on the land is an introduction both to nature and to civilization and gives limitless field for scientific and historic studies. And that's what an occupation really is. It is a way to use the land around you to dive into scientific inquiry or even historical studies and create a project out of it. Oftentimes that results in some sort of product at the end. So some examples of this at our school would be, we occasionally, during weather appropriate times of the year, we'll do an occupation on the raised bed gardens. And so the first occupation we did on raised bed gardens was actually building the raised bed gardens themselves and filling them with soil and getting them started. And that was an occupation. The students actually built the boxes themselves. They cut the wood, they screwed them, the boards together, and they filled them with soil. And so while they're doing that, scientifically, they're studying the properties of soil and what makes soil healthy for plants to grow in. And they're studying things like companion planting and what plants grow well together and why. It's also an opportunity for them to study pollinators and what kinds of plants can we grow in our gardens that will help our bees or other pollinators nearby. So it's a project where they're working with their hands, but they're also using that work as a springboard to learn different aspects of science or culture and history. Some more pictures. We have done greenhouse and hoop house occupations. So the greenhouse that we have that you saw was an occupation. Students built that with their own hands and filled it with things that they started to grow. A hoop house, this is what we will use oftentimes in the winter months or in the autumn. We have these hoops that go over the raised bed gardens and we cover them with plastic, and that extends our growing season. So that became an occupation as well. Of course, beekeeping is a regular occupation that students do at our school, and they get to have the opportunity to learn about bees, the lives of bees, and all of the different topics I mentioned earlier. This is a picture of the first bee occupation that they did, where they actually built the hives themselves, and they received the bees in the mail. I never knew that bees could come in the mail, but they do. And put the bees in the hives. So that was an occupation. This picture here shows they actually had one hive a couple years ago that died, unfortunately. All the bees died, and so as part of their occupation on bees at this point, they spent some time trying to figure out why the bees died. And they did some research, and I believe they tested some of the soil around the beehive itself, and they just did all kinds of things to try to solve this problem and come up with a solution to why those bees died. I think it was some sort of mite, some sort of parasitic mite that ended up killing that beehive in the end. But that was a great learning opportunity for them to discover that themselves. And of course, learning how to render wax and get honey out of the hives, always an important and fun thing to do as well. We've done a composting occupation. They built that compost bin that you see over here themselves. Meanwhile, they're learning all of the scientific aspects of why compost even happens, why natural things decompose and degrade, and why that's healthy for other living things to feed off of. So it's a chance for them to learn that. And recently we've added the mushroom occupation, which is one I'm a little bit more familiar with because this is an occupation that I started with some students at our school. I had never intended on becoming interested in mushrooms or fostering interest in other students about mushrooms. But I went home from school one day and I turned on the news, the local news, and saw an architect in Cleveland who has been working on finding ways to turn mycelium, which is kind of like what you might consider the roots of a mushroom, turning mycelium into building material. And I thought it was fascinating. One of his goals was to take a lot of run-down homes in Cleveland. So we have a lot of poverty in the Cleveland area, and his idea is to take these empty, sort of abandoned houses and buildings, grind them up in this enormous grinder machine to turn them into pulp that will get mixed into mushroom mycelium, which essentially grows through organic materials and will turn it into somewhat of a brick, and then compressing the brick into a very hard material. There's a property of mycelium that is one of the hardest things in the world when it's compressed and treated the right way. And so he was on the news talking about all this. Meanwhile, he's also talking with NASA, our space agency, about using mushroom-based building materials to construct shelters on Mars. Because one of the problems with working on the surface of Mars is the radiation that humans would face by being on the surface of Mars. But mushrooms actually absorb radiation. So if you create building materials out of it, that's something to look into. That's a possibility. So I contacted this architect, and he got back to me, and I asked him to come to our school. And he came. I thought I had a picture of him there, but he came to our school and spoke to our students about what he was doing, and he helped us get a mushroom occupation started. And so we currently are growing mushrooms outdoors in logs, and we're also working on growing mushrooms indoors. We have a humidity tent where we can control the humidity and the moisture and provide an environment that mushrooms grow in best. And we're starting to produce these mushrooms, which we will use in various ways. Students have come up with beauty supplies, facial creams made out of mushrooms, all kinds of ideas, but ultimately we're working toward having this architect come back and show us how to make building materials and solid materials out of the mushroom mycelium that we're able to produce. So some of it we're going to use for art, and some of it we are hoping to use to build actual chicken coops, chicken houses, if we are ever given permission by the city of Hudson to have chickens. So it's a really interesting work, but occupations are great because it's the kind of work that gives them purpose. They're doing that hands-on work that they need and they love, but they're relating it to the intellectual development that they are gaining from all of the study and research that has to go into what their hands are doing. And they're able to have some sort of end result from that occupation project. There's something coming at the end that's not just a test or not even just a presentation, but a product they can sell or something that chickens can live in. It's a great, meaningful way to give them physical and intellectual work. And so that's another way that science occurs in our program. And that is perfectly on time for lunch, the end of our talk about our program. So I know that was a lot of information that happened very quickly. So what we're going to do after lunch is have a question and answer session where you can ask myself and Kelly any questions that you might have about our program or anything that you just learned. And we're going to spend some time just having discussion and question and answer after lunch. And then I will begin talking about place-based learning, which is the real topic of the weekend. So we'll start that after the question and answer session.